I'm just going to say a few words about some performance practice research that I've done. So I am a music psychologist here within the school. I teach music psychology at all levels, and I specialise in musical preferences and listening behaviour, also kind of musicians' health and well-being and music and deafness, but I've also done a little bit of DJ performance practice research as well. So why did I get involved in this? Well, here's me in the early years. This is me as a student, and then playing out at house parties, and then that's at Birmingham University Guild, and then that was actually playing out in Birmingham. So I sort of did the bedroom DJ all the way through to getting paid for the sets out in Birmingham. I started off with house music, sort of house and hard house, but I then quickly became a drum and bass DJ when I was introduced to D&B by a friend, and I'm still doing that now. So here's me in Leeds playing at Old Red Bus Station, and then playing at Wire. That was June. So I've been doing this for 20 years, and thoroughly enjoy it, and can't imagine a time that I'll ever not do it. So yeah. When I first got to Leeds, and I was in the interview for a lectureship in music psychology, they said, "Oh, we've been looking you up online, and we see that you're a DJ." I was like, "Oh, okay, right, yeah, I'm a DJ. And would you teach our students how to DJ?" And I thought, well, yeah, absolutely, that would be really, really good fun. And so I taught students as part of something that was called a practical skills module. And the aim of this module was to enable students to develop new skills, so things that they hadn't done before, African drumming, Cuban music, gamelan, and so on, just introducing them to different types of practical skills to that which they may have done may have completed in school. So it got offered as an elective within this module, and I had to sort of think about how I was going to design it, and needed to give them a textbook to read, which was the Broughton and Brewster How to DJ Properly. And the Director of Student Education said to me, "Is a group of 25 okay?" And I said, no, how about 5? Maybe 5 in a group. And he was like, "Well, what about 20? I said, no, like 5. So I ended up with 15 in the group as a compromise. Really difficult to teach that many, Jim's nodding there, really difficult to teach that many people, because really it needs individual instruction. But I managed it by getting people into groups and having them, smaller groups, and having them come at different times, and putting a bit of extra time into it so that they still had their allotted time. But yeah, it was really good fun. This was the feedback from the students, that they loved learning about beat matching, about different forms of dance music. So we started with some very basic 4-to-floor house, and progressed into some different styles a bit later on, but you really need to kind of get those basics. So they enjoyed learning about different styles. They enjoyed that it was practical and hands-on quickly, so not too much theory, just getting straight on the decks and getting involved, learning how to handle the vinyl. And then what we did was we sort of recorded the mixes to listen back to in their groups, so they could hear where they were making mistakes, and they enjoyed that bit as well, and they enjoyed the general kind of dancing and having fun that was involved with it. What was harder was the size of the classes, as I say. It's quite, and we were using vinyl. It's quite a difficult skill to learn. And really you need dedicated time on the decks, which is very difficult when you're in a group situation. So they all wanted more time and more individual tuition as well, which I couldn't give them within the context of the classes. Another thing that they wanted as well was actual sort of decks in the school to practice on. We don't have a suite of decks that the students could practice on, so the only time they could was actually in the class itself. Now, in terms of assessment, they were only assessed on attendance and engagement, so nothing specifically about the skills that they'd developed. It was just attendance and engagement. I didn't really, and this carried on for, I don't know, maybe two or 3 years, but then the module stopped and I stopped teaching this, and I didn't really think too much about it after that. I mean, it had been a fun activity, but I wasn't really thinking about how DJing might be embedded in the curriculum, particularly. But I did sort of make a name for myself as a DJ in the music psychology world, and I was invited by Helen Pryor to get involved in this study. She was looking at the notion of shape or shaping in relation to musical performance. She was looking at how performing musicians often use this term spontaneously when they're describing their performance, and you know, it's sort of used synonymously with to describe musical structure or changes in dynamics, climatic moments, direction, energy, and she did some work with violinists and harpsichordists, and just kind of looked at, you know, drilled down into what they meant by that, and the specific techniques that they would use in order to shape the music. And she said to me, we've had one respondent to our survey who's a DJ, but I don't really know how to interpret the DJ's response. So, and actually we're just focusing on classical musicians. I think it would be really interesting to broaden this out to DJs as well. So we did a research study and asked DJs about how they shape their performances. So here's an example of the participants, and you can see that Mr. Switch, who you're going to see later on, was part of this study as well. And we asked them to talk about this notion of shape in performance, and then to give us examples like demonstrations, and we asked them to perform with shaping and then perform without shaping, which was interesting, is using the same methodology that Helen had used. So these DJs were all self-taught. Tony had a small stint at the DJ Academy when he was younger, but otherwise just all of them learning the skills themselves. So we got a mixture. Matt was using vinyl, Rich was using Serato, and then Tony was using digital media players, so it's quite a range of technology within it. So what did we find? Well, in thinking about musical shape, they talked about the basics being, the tracks that they're selecting and beat matching. So they're the absolute fundamentals. But then the opportunity to shape the music is actually mostly in the transitional period, and this is where the real creative practice happens. And so they talked about the use of EQs, the use of special effects on the mixer, and then scratching techniques as well. So Rich and Tony were both scratch DJs. So sort of improvisational elements as they're actually doing the mix. They also talked about kind of building overall sound intensity or energy, talking about different mixing styles. So a kind of a smooth style, which is mainly blending with the EQs, or a choppy style, which is using the crossfaders to a greater extent and with rapid movements. So kind of building the overall sound intensity through the techniques that they're using. They also talked about, and when they're thinking about this notion of shape, the role of familiar and unfamiliar music as well. So kind of crowd pleasing with tunes that everybody knows, or just mixing it up and having unfamiliar tunes or unexpected elements within the tune. So yeah, they were talking about the ways in which they would use this. They also talked about shape as music as represented by the waveform itself, and there was a lot of gesturing. So here you can see Matt's talking about the way in which he builds a mix over the course of 60 minutes. So he'll build up the sound intensity and the energy level, and he might bring in as you can see here, then perhaps a couple of tracks that aren't so intense or complex, but then building it up again. And this is his this is the way that he plans his set every time he does an hour. And actually it was really interesting, the gestures that people were using, and Rich was sort of saying, oh well, sometimes I'll just do a flat mix, and sometimes it's just building all the way. And it's actually very similar to the guidance that is found in that textbook, that Broughton and Brewster, which I think is the only the only textbook out there which is designed to help people to learn how to DJ. They also talked about how the shape of the individual track itself determines what they'll do with it. And so if you've got a track which the texture doesn't change, or a track which has sort of different elements to it, then you have to mix those in different ways. And so we're talking about specific tracks. When we asked them to perform without shape, they basically said, so you want me to play badly then? So there was this kind of implicit notion of that they were shaping the music, as they were doing their kind of day-to-day mixing. So, and it was interesting what happened when they did it without shape, is they brought the tune in when it wasn't beat matched, and this sort of, just played with the EQs in a just a haphazard way, and it really did sound awful. So it was an interesting exercise to get them to do. So just to summarise the findings then, these were the kind of key elements that the DJs were talking about, the importance of the record selection and how that's impacted by the type of night, the audience, whether they're doing a back-to-back session with somebody else, how familiar they are with the tunes, kind of understanding the structure of the tunes, so where there's a bass drop, where there's a breakdown, where they can bring the tune in, for those who were scratching, identifying samples within the music to scratch over the top, and then use of cue points and EQ and effects. So lots going on there really in terms of their creative practice. So that was one study, and then I'm going to talk about a second study that I did with Douglas McCutcheon and Mark Elliott, and this was just looking at really what sort of establishing what skills might be accessed through learning to DJ, and the potential value of those skills for music education. So recognising that young people have increasing access to music technology and are engaging in more informal learning practices. And this the DJing as a predominantly informal practice has the potential to develop creative and musical skills as effectively as more traditional methods and instruments. But we wanted to ask people what they thought about this. We also did a study which was comparing the ability of DJs to synchronise movement, so sensory motor synchronisation, and we wanted to know whether DJs, because beat matching is such an important part of the skill, whether DJs were on a par with professional musicians, violinists, or Jim's nodding because he took part in this study actually.
You never did show us how we did.
So there were two parts to the study. The first was survey and interview about perceptions of DJs and the skills that they can learn, and the second was the experimental research. And we can see here we've got 7 classical musicians, 7 DJs and 7 non-musicians. So what did we find? Well, 20 out of the 21 felt that DJs can be perceived as musicians, and the reason that they gave for this was the manipulation of mood and emotion, the knowledge of kind of musical structure, rhythm, melodies, technical knowledge and creativity. There's a sort of sense in the responses that mastering the technology is similar to mastering an instrument, essentially. And you can see here we've got one saying, when you watch DJ Craze, it's like a musician playing an instrument. It's like he's playing the piano, he's got all these beats set up, plus he's using the turntables and scratching, so doing different things with both hands. So likening it there to playing the piano. These were the skills that the musicians and non-musicians felt were developed through DJing. There's only one there that is DJ specific, and that's actually the mixing. Rhythmic perception was identified as most important, and that sort of provided a rationale for the second bit of the study that we did, and also harmonic perception. Because when you bring pieces in and they're in a different key and the keys don't match, it can sound quite bad when on a DJ mix. So so a broad range of skills were listed. We asked about the cultural relevance of DJing, and all agreed. Well, you can see here that as a group, they said that DJing has a greater relevance than the most frequent response was that DJing had a greater relevance than classical music in today's society. But you can see here that there's an equal relevance. And interestingly, it was the classical musicians who mostly claimed that DJing was more culturally relevant than classical music, so that was quite interesting. We asked, should DJing be part of the curriculum? We had some contrasting views here. So some people saying, yes, absolutely it should be, and others kind of felt it should be optional or were unsure. So you can see here saying sort of more of a hobby. If you get good at, you could perhaps go professional, but I don't really think it's an educational thing, so that's a slightly controversial view there. So that's some of the elements from the interviews. Just again, we had the DJ tutors talking about the importance of choosing music that's enjoyable, of the students choosing music that's enjoyable and engaging, and talking about how they were actually teaching, how the kind of the building blocks of teaching how to DJ, and then also the kind of functional value. So, its place in the music industry, and you're equipping people with the skills to work. So, yeah, some reflections on that. Study 2, how accurately DJs can time and coordinate their movement, and we hypothesised that DJs would match the professional musicians in this sense. Actually, there were no significant differences. So it wasn't the case that the DJs were better or worse in the tapping along to an auditory metronome. And we did a condition as well with a phase distractor, which was to mimic where you're bringing in a track and it's out of sync. So yeah, so no particularly strong findings there. Another thing that came out of the study was just about how do we assess DJ skills. There's a lot of young people who are interested in it, but how do you teach it and how do you assess it? It's just been brought to my attention actually yesterday about the GCSE syllabus, and I wasn't aware of this before, but just having a look at the criteria here for what you would be expected to do in order to achieve on your GCSE music in DJ performance, and yeah, so it specifies on your own and actually doing some performance with someone else as well. And Jim, you probably could talk to this.
I was part of the panel.
Oh, were you?
It's actually a travesty, because what they've done, if you look, is they copy-pasted solo to ensemble. And what it means is in ensemble, the DJ is still expected to mix two songs. So any other musicians in the ensemble have to copy whatever the DJ is mixing, rather than the DJ being part of the ensemble. They're more like a backing track. And I've fought tooth and nail ever since it was published to say, that doesn't stand up, that's not supporting the art form at all. Yeah.
So this is an interesting discussion point then about looking at these criteria and looking at the skills here, kind of what is considered a basic skill, and then intermediate and advanced. And you can see here that the advanced skills are all relating to scratching and beat juggling, so turntablism basically. So you've got, so you know, is it the case then that in order to do well at DJ performance, you actually then have to be a scratch DJ? That's what this.
There's actually hot cue drumming in there, which has become tone play for the people who don't want to do turntablism, which is as technical as scratching.
Okay.
Which was put in there again at our request. But yeah, they were finding it really hard to find musicianship without turntablism, so we said no, look, the buttons allow you to do this as well.
Yeah.
We'll talk about this more later.
We can talk. Yeah, so I'm aware that I need to wrap up anyway. But I think there's some questions around, you know, what skills are developed, whether the criteria matches onto the achievement and the outcome. And I guess I've just got a few questions just to finish off. You know, I don't actually know how much DJ performance is happening in schools. How many people are taking this option to do DJ performance at GCSE level? To what extent do teachers feel able to teach and assess DJ performance according to the criteria? DJ practice has generally been, you know, informal, and so how much of it should be, how much of that learning should be formalised? And I think this is a question we'll come back to later as well. You know, how much formal learning should be encouraged, and what are the barriers to including DJ performance practice in the curriculum? And how can we overcome those barriers? What are those key barriers? So I was sort of hoping that we could have some debate around these issues as part of the network event today. So yeah. Anyway, I'll stop there because I'm over time and we've got a yeah, okay. I think so. Yeah. So what we're going to have now is we're going to have a demonstration from Jim about how to actually use DJ software. So yeah.
I wonder, Alinka, if there's been any questions that in the Zoom that we can be informed about.
Yeah, there's no specific questions about the talk. There is a participant just wondering if there's going to be able to get copy of the slides.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, I'm happy to share slides.
Yeah, we can sort that out through the Eventbrite, I'll send that out.
Yeah.
I have time for, say, 2 or 3 questions around the room and you choose to, kind of synthesise them and answer them. How long have we got?
Probably just a minute or two,
That's all
so
we
maybe
need.
just a
So
question
2 or
or
3
two.
questions, because it's interesting.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions? Okay, then I'll ask one.
Okay.
I'm really interested in the voice, of DJs and how can we tell Matt from Rich from Tony, and you can. Their voice is specific, would you agree? And what is it that contributes to voice? In any kind of shape or form for professional musicians, you can tell who's playing. They have a voice, they're authoring a self in the sound. And so when it comes to DJs, has it got something to do with this architectural assemblage, certainly for turntablists? They're like architects. They don't, they're not composing and authoring, their music in the same way as, a contemporary Western, the composer. They have a particular, generally speaking, a way of working and an intentionality. So it's no surprise when you looked at the shape, when they didn't like working without shape, because I suspect that took away intentionality. But that's another question. Voice. How authoring a sound, what did you notice?
Absolutely, they've all got a sort of a signature. They're very different styles of mixing. So, for example, Matt doesn't like to get to the breakdown. He likes to mix before that happens, and so he's got a very quick style of mixing, very energetic and intense. Whereas Rich, for example, likes to, if he's playing drum and bass, he might throw in a reggae track, or he really likes to mix it up, and that gives him the opportunity to scratch on top. Whereas Tony, just as you'll see later, is just the skills that he brings to that, the creativity of the beat juggling and the sampling and all of those kind of scratching techniques that he does is it's beautifully crafted and set into sort of things that you might call battle. You might have like a 5 to 10 minute battle, which is how he wins the World DMC Championships. So that again is different. So yeah, they've got a style. Is that what you mean?
Authoring their sound, their style, their sound, and their shape. To me, and having done some research into DJing back in 2012, 6 DJs, their whole architectural building, structures, and how they put things together, the configuration was very different. So you could tell. And something about how DJs learn from each other, because it's an incredibly social kind of, they're like bowerbirds, picking from here and picking from there, and their whole, so, it's a sort of different set of values that go into it. It's a really interesting question, in terms of how DJs learn from each other, but also what is it, this shaping that goes on, because it was a really surprising question that you did in the first study. Really interesting work. Thank you so much.
Great, brilliant. Okay, I think we should go next door and see Jim and see.
There was quite a couple more questions on Zoom if there is time. I don't know whether.
I think we should move on actually at this point.